think about violence in this neighborhood, most often, what comes to mind for most people, I assume is the conflicts that go on between the people in these neighborhoods, right? So, words like guns, gangs, black on black crime, etc. And there are literally thousands of organizations, as we've heard some of them, set up throughout the city that are basically that have put hundreds of thousands of dollars behind them in order to address this kind of internal violence that goes on. So state-funded agencies like the community center, the Park Community Center, independent community groups, social service agencies, etc. However, there was not a single organization, I guess, prior to the creation of J4A based in these communities to address state violence and state, or what we call vertical violence in these communities. The psychological, physical, and economic brutality that is experienced on a daily basis by poor and racialized people in the city, in every aspect of their interaction with the state. So in their housing, right, their education, their work, the media, and their interactions with the criminal justice system, and of course their interactions with the police department. And so it's this violence that is conducted with the purpose of containing and repressing entire communities, and precipitates the conditions where horizontal violence, so the violence that goes on between poor working class people within these communities, takes place. So the Justice for Albi campaign is dedicated to educating, organizing, and struggling against state violence, particularly state violence in its most physical and direct form, police brutality. To understand the reality that Toronto's marginalized communities face today, we have to look back to when the conditions of horizontal and vertical violence were first put in place, firmly established in the 1980s and 1990s. So horizontal violence meaning the violence that goes on between people living in the communities, vertical violence, violence that comes down from the state, such as police brutality. So the 1980s and the 1990s, this was one of the worst times, or periods of times for anyone living in social housing in Toronto. Ghettos across the city were flooded with drugs and guns. Just as social programs and services were being gutted by all levels of the state, so by the city, province, and the federal government. Athletic and after-school programs were cut, community centers were closed down, while an ongoing recession and deindustrialization basically pushed unemployment levels to levels even higher than they are right now. Basically, an entire generation of people, of youth, were forced into illegal means of survival. And crimes and murders reached new highs in the city, with the homicide rate in 1992 being that almost double that of last year's. And this coordinated rise in crime in these neighborhoods was then used to justify unprecedented levels of police terror in these affected communities. And so, particularly the community that was the most targeted was the Jamaican community in Toronto at the time. The murder of two unarmed black men by the Toronto Police Force, Buddy Evans and Albert Johnson, in the late 1970s, led to the formation of the Black Action Defense Committee, which essentially was the first organization of its kind in the city in order to organize against police brutality. Massive mobilizations led by BADC, Black Action Defense Committee, against shootings and subsequent acquittal of the officers involved forced the government and forced the provincial government to put in place a new public complaints commission for cases of police violence, and that was put in place in 1980. However, the police shootings and murders continued, culminating in the death of a black teenager, Michael Lawson, who was shot in the back of the head in 1988, and a 23-year-old single mother who was paralyzed by a police gunshot to her back in 1989 near Virginia Finch area. And when in 1992, the same time as the Los Angeles rebellions were going on in response to Rodney King's beating, the officers who had murdered the teenager in the city, Michael Wade Lawson, were acquitted by an all-white jury. And the next month, another young black man was killed in the Vaughan Nova area of Toronto, which was where BADC was, its activities were based. And these two events, basically the deliberate failure of the justice system to provide justice to victims of police terror, as well as the continued murders by the Toronto Police Service, basically caused or sparked spontaneous rebellion from the anger among the poor for marginalized people that were affected by this kind of violence. Dubbed the Yonge Street Riots, what happened was an organized demonstration by Batsy on Yonge Street developed into a revolt, an open revolt where hundreds of marching black and other racialized youth basically fought with police and destroyed property around City Hall and along Yonge Street, causing over $100,000 in damages and resulting in over 20 arrests. The rebellion had 200 arrests. The rebellion had two major effects. One, the revolt itself and other mobilizations around Lawson's murder forced once again another change in the process of police complaints with the formation of the Special Investigations Unit, or the SIU that Salam talked about. The SIU was presented at the time of its creation as an independent civilian body that would monitor and investigate all future cases of police abuse and misconduct. And the second and infinitely more meaningful impact of the Yonge Street rebellion was that over the next few years there were no police murder. So from now on, you had police when they were thinking of pulling the trigger, they actually had to consider the impact that murder would have on their own safety and also on in terms of the mobilizations that were rising in the community in response to their violence. And so this did have an impact on the number of police, cases of police brutality in the city. Today, it is a recognized fact that the SIU was never the civilian agency that it was purported to be at the time of its inception. Of the many hundreds of cases that it's investigated, as Sam talked about, it has only brought 2 officers to court to date since the time it was created in 1990. And those 2 cases were acquitted by the courts. 31 of the 31 murders that the SIU has investigated, or police killings, have been found to be justified. And now we have the ombudsman report by a provincial official that confirms what anyone having dealt with the SIU prior to this had known, that the SIU was a corrupt and deliberately ineffective body designed to cover up the crimes of the Toronto Police Force. Basically, not only is the body staffed with ex-policemen, for example, the ex-executive director of the SIU currently is a retired Halton Regional Police officer, and in the report they talk about SIU investigators even coming to interviews with badges on, police rings on, etc. Not only that, but even according to right now the current director of the SIU, Ian Scott, basically superior officers in the force, when there's an investigation, are directly involved in the collusion and covering up of murders and shootings. So that statements provided by officers involved are first they have to be approved by a lawyer. The witness officers and the accused officers often deal with the same lawyer and basically have their statements corroborated. And often the SIU basically is told to wait days before they actually interview some of the police involved, so the stories can be checked out. The SIU is not called to the scene in many of the cases right away, as is legally mandated, but instead are often come to the scene hours after the crime has actually taken place, so evidence can be shifted around, etc. And I mean, we saw the impact of this in the case of Aoi, when the SIU basically confirmed the lies, what have now been proven to be lies by the Toronto police, that Aoi had a fake gun on him and was involved in some kind of robbery, and now those claims have been proven to be false. And of course, the media collaborates with the SIU and with the police force to further, for example, in the case of Aoi, criminalize him even before any kind of investigation would take place, as Toronto police interrupted a robbery in progress. That was basically the only reporting of Aoi's murder that went out at the time.